So the White House was interesting. It definitely felt amazing. One of the things that was exhilarating about it was I made no money. I had nowhere to live. I was constantly meeting new people and on the road. I had to write where I was staying every night on the hotel pad because I couldn't keep track of what city I was waking up in. So that was the first time I'd ever even heard of McKinsey. I didn't grow up in a house where I knew about business or things like that. And I deeply remember getting the offer for McKinsey, and it was McKinsey San Francisco, which was really hard to get. And I remember thinking, my life is made. My grandmother, she said a number of really interesting things to me. We finally settled on Wells Fargo. I think I felt really torn. And she said, look, just try it for a decade. It's not a long-term commitment. I laughed because I was there 12 years. And it feels like a blink. I went to the person I was working with at the time and said, I'm going to help you find my backfill, but I'm out. And I just have faith I will find something else. It was some really short period of time afterwards that Apple came calling and said, we need a small confidential group of people to work on what became Apple Pay. Build Apple Pay, and then I helped build Google Pay or Google Wallet, and then Samsung Pay. It was really fun. It's like the same little team. It was the type of work where it's 4 a.m, you have 3 kids, 2 careers, and you're still so happy to be working.
What's up, everybody? My name's Alex Lobert, and welcome to the best job I've ever had. On today's show, I'm talking with Michelle Bonner Techel. Now, I might be underselling it by saying that Michelle's career reads like a laundry list of impossible accomplishments. Michelle started a career in government, working in the White House for then President Clinton, and then transitioning to a role in the Treasury Department. After government, Michelle made her way to business, where she worked at McKinsey in San Francisco for a number of years. After McKinsey, I think Michelle was pretty transparent that she didn't quite find herself in the cool area that she expected after such high-flying roles. She found her way to banking and Wells Fargo. But Michelle is really like a case study in being able to create opportunity even where you might not expect it. So Michelle had senior roles at Wells Fargo, but I think she's most known for actually being one of the people that launched Apple Pay. Michelle actually still has a patent for some of the technology that was developed during that initial launch. And it was then after Wells Fargo and launching Apple Pay that she made her way to tech. Michelle then joined Facebook, where she took senior roles in both commerce and messaging. Now, at the end of her time at Meta, Michelle decided that she needed just one more challenge. So she actually joined the C-suite of a company that Meta acquired, but then it was looking to spin out Customer. After that transition was completed, Michelle found her way back to government, where she worked for then President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. What sets Michelle apart is her ability to chart such a clear path for herself and then have the focus to be able to go execute on it. I had so much fun with this conversation. I am always inspired when I talk to Michelle. I hope that you enjoy it as well. Here's Michelle Bonner Techel. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. I'm so excited to finally get the nod.
This is like an honor to be able to talk with you. So just so we're clear.
No, definitely not.
All right. Well, first question, where does this podcast find you today?
In my green space. So I'm at home and I have 2 graduating seniors next week, and my baby is going to be graduating 8th grade the week afterwards. So I am in this house for the next couple of weeks, and then you can probably find me wandering the streets crying.
Gosh, that is so...
I have my work to fall back on to keep me whole.
Yeah, that's a transition moment.
It is.
Absolutely. You're going to need that green, that zen.
Yes.
Part of your home.
Yes. I pre-unnested.
Exactly. Wow. Well, that's so exciting. And
it is.
Congratulations to them, by the way. I think
it's very exciting to actually watch. I work a lot with folks in their young 20s. It's super exciting to see my kids getting close to that age. I'm quite optimistic about the future.
Sorry, second intro question. But
Yes,
do your kids take your advice?
they do listen to us,
Okay.
but only, 1% of the words get in. So you have to pick what matters.
That's fair. I always think it's funny when people like you, like very successful careers, and like everyone else is seeking your advice, and then like you talk to your kids, and I feel like everyone goes, and I am immediately humbled. Like, they don't want to listen.
I do have a funny anecdote on that. As you know, I worked for the White House last year and had a bunch of high school interns. And my son actually said to me, "Do I have to intern for you and work for the White House?" Like it was the bitterest pill he could possibly swallow. So, no, they do not think. I mean, I'm sure even the movie stars' kids do not think their parents are cool.
Exactly. Kids will always humble you. Well, Michelle, you have had such a cool career. You've worked at the White House,
Right.
you've worked at McKinsey, a leader at Wells Fargo, Meta. Wow. I feel like you've had like everyone's potentially best job across your career. So I'm very excited to hear this. But how about we dive into the most important question?
Okay, I'm ready.
Michelle, what is the best job you've ever had?
I love this question. One of the things I love about this question is how strong a reaction I had to it right away, which is there cannot be one answer. There just can't be because your life changes too much. And what is the right job or the best job at one point in time just is by definition not going to be the right job at the best job at another point in time. There were times when I was working at Wells Fargo that I thought it was almost embarrassing. A stodgy old brand. No one I knew was working in retail banking. That wasn't, where you went to after McKinsey in the White House. And looking back, I realized what it enabled. I was able to grow in my career a lot and get a lot of exposure, which I'm sure we can talk about some of these things, to really amazing industries and experience. But I started Wells Fargo basically pregnant. And I finished Wells Fargo with when my youngest was going into kindergarten because I knew I was ready then to start traveling and having a more chaotic schedule and all of those things. So if I look back, it was the best job in the world for me trying to manage being a dual career, highly ambitious couple with 3 kids under the age of 4 in a time where even with all of my background and, being in this day and age, I mean, having children was definitely a disability. So to be able to do all of that makes that the best job for right then, even though it was one that at times didn't light me up. At times it did. At times during the time I spent there, I really got to do some amazing things. So it's a balance.
That completely resonates with me. That obviously the best job is for a time, right? It's not necessarily at all times. I will also note how it is interesting to hear. I hope that shift has happened in banking. I feel like banking is such a challenging environment in so many ways. You hear all these stories, especially about investment banking, but I think, even with commercial banks and the ability to have a family and like obviously you were able to manage it, but it sounds like it was harder maybe than it should have been.
You never know how much of that is of your own making and your own expectations or subtle cues that you're picking up. Across the industries, I've seen a few things. And I believe that there is a range out there, but I've been generally pretty fortunate.
Yeah. Okay, so Wells Fargo was the right job for you at the time. But again, you've also worked at the White House, you've worked at McKinsey. I guess I love your thoughts on those were two of your early career jobs, right? How did that? Yeah, I don't know. Was that right for that time as well? Did you
Mhm.
also feel like those were a fit?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So the White House was interesting. It definitely felt amazing, just truly amazing. So I was in college, got an internship in the White House, and then the division that I worked in, which was called scheduling in advance, where basically you travel ahead of the president or the first lady by about a week and help put together everything associated with their visit. And then you stayed while they were there, and then when they left, you jumped to the next city. And I did that actually living at UCLA in the sorority house. So President Clinton came to LA often enough. So I finished up my studies in 3.25 years, very proud of that, and spent my senior year just waiting for graduation and working for the president and flying out and then flying back and going to a date party. And so, yeah, at the time, it basically felt like I was, ruler of the world. It really felt amazing. But then again, right time over years, one of the things that was exhilarating about it was I made no money. I had nowhere to live. I was constantly meeting new people and on the road. I had to write where I was staying every night on the hotel pad because I couldn't keep track of what city I was waking up in. And I looked forward and I didn't see any role models. I didn't see anyone that I wanted to grow up and be. And so I did get very planful about that. And I moved from the White House to the Treasury Department because I knew the Treasury Department was going to help set me up for a non-political career. And then when I was at the Treasury Department, the Treasury at that time was filled with a number of folks from Goldman Sachs and McKinsey. So that was the first time I'd ever even heard of McKinsey. I didn't grow up in a house where I knew about business or things like that. And so then it was clearly I want to go to business school and go to McKinsey because now I had role models for what that would look like. And there's some funny anecdotes about that as well. And I deeply remember getting the offer for McKinsey, and it was McKinsey San Francisco, which was really hard to get. And I remember thinking, my life is made. I mean, there was my glee and joy that there was no challenge that could ever happen in my professional life again, because now I was getting this finishing school and this gold ring, which of course now, almost 30 years later, I realized it had its warts too. And by the way, it didn't protect me from having failures in my role or ending up working at a bank that I thought maybe was going to be boring that ended up being interesting. And so both of those did feel at the time to be really special. And I think they were, but I can reflect now that I also understood what wasn't good about them and why I wanted out how to get out, which I think makes them not perfect for anyone for an enduring period of time, or at least not everyone.
Right. I think it's so relatable, that feeling that once you get this job, you will have achieved it. You will have succeeded. And the rest of your life is, all problems will fade away at that moment.
I think it was Viola Davis speak once at, well, I know we saw Viola Davis speak at Meta, but I think it was her that talked about, because she received the EGOT, right? The Emmy, the Grammy, the Oscar, and the Tony. And came from nothing. And I think she was one of the folks, I may be misattributing this to the wrong speaker, who said they just were sure once they got there, it would be enough. And the stories are, it's never true, right? It's never actually enough. The reality is we're just privileged to have any of these types of choices, which I know you understand, but my grandmother lived to be 100. Her mother lived to be 107. And she said a number of really interesting things to me when I was transitioning. I was leaving McKinsey and trying to decide what job to take. And one of the things she talked about was she thought it was so odd as a child of the Depression that our generation, or my generation, thought work was supposed to be something other than a job you did where you earned pay. And it was just beyond puzzling to her, because what did we expect? We were working in exchange for pay to be able to order to eat and keep a roof over our heads. And the truth is, many people would kill for that, right? Just to even have the job that feels like a job and a grind. So all of this is just a ridiculous level of privilege. The other half of that anecdote that I love was we finally settled on Wells Fargo, which she said in response to, because I think I felt really torn. And she said, look, just try it for a decade. It's not a long-term commitment. And I look back and I laugh because I was there 12 years and it feels like a blink. It feels like even at my age, I don't have to be 100 to say, it wasn't that much of my life. It wasn't a long-term commitment. But I look at my 18-year-old kids and if I told them, just go try it for a decade, they would think I was insane. But each of these chapters I've actually done in politics and banking and tech. They've all been about a decade, and they all just kind of feel equally weighted in the quilts or the pattern of my career. And part of what makes it so interesting that someone like you is willing to compliment me.
Right. First of all, mothers and grandmothers, so wise. Although I have that same debate actually with my mother regularly about, shouldn't jobs just be about, it's about
It
getting
enables
paid to
life.
do something to enable life. And I do think it's, I don't want to call it modern, but certainly it is a more prevalent way of thinking now, right? That a job should be something that fulfills you in a different way. Which actually leads me to a question for you. What were you seeking? Like what do you look for then in a job?
Yeah. So my parents were professionals. My dad was a dentist and my mom was a psychologist. But both of them were basically sole proprietors, right? And so what I watched growing up was how hard that is. Because when you take an hour off, you don't get paid. You take a vacation, you don't get paid. It's very, very expensive. And you have to worry about whether or not you can keep access to healthcare. My dad got really sick and ended up passing away. Getting healthcare when you're not a part of a big company and you have a pre-existing condition, that is not a joke, right? And so for me, the first thing I wanted to do, which is probably why I have so many of the brand names, is is flee to safety. The bigger the brand name, the bigger the set of employees you get. Okay, they're going to put money in your retirement for you. Sign me up. Absolutely. I don't think that's why I went to the White House. I think that was a little bit more just some fortune and timing. I do think that there's some luck in there. But the other ones were stability. And it was always very, very important to me that I got paid while being on vacation. That concept was something I was going to chase. And then I think what I learned once I got into some of these industries was what played to my sort of special strengths is connecting across these different divisions, these different really complex and really diverse types of work and types of roles. So the Treasury Department, when I worked there, we had customs, we had the US Secret Service, we had the Mint, the Federal Management Service, I think it was, where we actually printed the Social Security checks, and talk about a diverse set of businesses and personalities and roles. And I figured out that's what I was really good at. That's how I stood out, was I was able to connect all those bits of context, which is a little bit like the McKinsey thing. And then I did kind of always have two steps out.
Okay.
So I was pretty planful. So again, at the White House, I knew I didn't want to go that path. So I went to the Treasury. When I went to the Treasury, I already knew I wanted to work at McKinsey, mostly because the people I respected had worked there. So two of the other people who were at Treasury at the time were Sheryl Sandberg and Nancy Killefer, and both of them were McKinsey. And that seemed awesome. So that's what I did because they were great examples. And then when I got to McKinsey, that was probably the place where I was surprised, right? Because now I was at this echelon that I'd finally reached. And then it was, oh, but like the best job out there is Wells. It happens to be across the street. And then when I was at Wells, I was very planful moving in. So I probably never stayed in the same role for more than 18 months for 20 years of working, right? Maybe
Wow.
24 months. It was always, what's the next thing that I want to build? What's the next thing that I want to learn? And so what I was always chasing there was kind of what's the middle step to get to the next thing. And I always liked the jungle gym analogy. I think probably because the ladder never worked great for me. If you started out, 19 years old working for the president of the United States, bossing around Secret Service agents, it's really hard to climb up from there. I mean, some people do, but I didn't see how. And so I always took this jungle gym of, oh, I want to go try that and I want to go try this. And I always moved around the divisions at Wells and at Facebook Meta. So it was always very planful. Well, what's the next thing I want to go try? An example from Meta would be I started in commerce and payments because that was my transition in. And I really wanted to work on WhatsApp, or I wanted to have like a big vantage point across Meta. I looked at different opportunities and nothing sort of sorted out because at that point I didn't really have like a great story to tell for some of those roles. And so I went into sort of the mothership of Meta, which was the advertising engine, which is where you and I met.
Mhm.
And that enabled me to then be better positioned for some of these other roles I was really interested in. And then ended up working on bringing all the messaging together for business to people messaging, and finally got to work at WhatsApp. So it was always like a couple of steps out.
It's so fascinating. What do you think? So you were intrigued by WhatsApp, right? And the messaging side of Meta. There's obviously to your point, the safety side of it that you were looking for holistically, which probably took you to big brands, not, the startup life.
I did not do the startups, even though I lived in
Right.
San Francisco in '01.
Yeah, right. You're the epicenter of it all. What do you think you were seeking or looking for with even like WhatsApp? Was it about messaging that excited you? Or yeah, I'm just curious. Like, yeah, what
The
motivated you
ubiquity.
there?
I mean, I do think WhatsApp is one of the best products ever invented. The ubiquity of it, and getting to see. There's a big theme of getting to see the world, getting to learn from new people, getting to see something different. I mean, all the use cases for WhatsApp were more interesting. I wouldn't have felt the same way about Messenger or Instagram direct. So it wasn't messaging per se, although I did really believe in that opportunity. I would say the other theme was, which I kind of backward invented a little bit into my time at Wells, but I started to fill my repertoire of the things I was good at. So one was that connecting across. And then the second I realized I was really good at was kind of being that second person in. So you have a big idea, you've got $100 million at these big companies, and you want to go build a thing. So, for example, at Wells Fargo, we decided we wanted to go build a credit card business. We had never run a credit card business intentionally, it had always been sort of an accommodation product. So, tons of money, huge bank, huge retail footprint, and we're hiring in executives that know how to do credit card. Put me in. It was very similar to then how I ended up doing digital payments. Even similar to the first role at Meta, where I was the first full time payments and commerce product marketing person, where it was like, we know kind of what we want to do here. There's a bunch of money, there's some people, and I became really good at figuring out what to do with that. I could hire the right people, I could come up with the right strategy using my McKinsey background. I could go deep into the weeds. I was super curious to learn all of the things, which ends up being important when you're one of those very first people, because then you can kind of get a bunch of these teams going at once. And so I think I was kind of always chasing the next giant investment where not too much of it was figured out. Honestly, the role we were in together was the only time I ever worked on a part of the business that was mature.
Fascinating. So
And
yeah,
one of the roles.
right. Always looking for these things you could go help build.
Yeah, it's fun.
So yeah, one other question on this thread. So you're talking about how you're very planful, right? You're thinking 2 steps in the future about where you wanted to go. For example, WhatsApp. Even it sounds like the different opportunities at Wells. So some people might have that ambition, but you were actually able to go do it. Like you've held very senior roles at Wells, you've held very senior roles at Meta. Like, how did you do it? Like, how did you get the
The better
jobs,
question
right?
is, how am I getting you to give me all these compliments? I'm going to have to watch this back a number of times.
You did. This is not sponsored
I'll
by
send
Michelle,
I'll
just so
send
we're
you my
clear.
crypto later.
Right.
I mean, focus is a huge strength of mine. I might as well just tattoo it on my forehead. Because, well, I guess backwards so they can see it in the mirror. Uh, I'm pretty undeterred when I get a goal in mind. I don't really have trouble sort of staying on task or any of those things. So for me, once I just lay out the plan, I'm going to execute against it. And then a little luck comes in, but making the transition, I'll just kind of expand on this. And also you have to be willing to fail. So I was in this towards the end of the time I was working in the credit card business at Wells. And I was pretty miserable because I was doing a lot of strategy work, and I had done strategy work. And it was a lot of deck work, it was a lot of churn. And, like most big companies, half of your deck work is wasted because as it moves through rounds of review, it just gets deleted and redone, right? So you're burning yourself out and not being able to see the through line. So I went to the person I was working with at the time and said, I'm going to help you find my backfill, but I'm out. And I just have faith I will find something else. But I don't want to leave everybody empty handed. So let's just start working on my transition. And I was fortunate enough to work with someone who wasn't like, okay, and therefore you're excluded and fired. But it was some really short period of time afterwards that Apple came calling and said, we need a small confidential group of people to work on what became Apple Pay. And I had just put myself in a position where I had time and enough of the expertise and this incredible woman who was willing to, I mean, she was just amazing at that actual sponsorship role of seeing an opportunity and ceding the floor to someone who could grow into it. But if I hadn't taken the leap, I would have been too busy. And so
Right.
that created the space. And then once I got there, I knew I wanted to go into tech. And so then it became okay. First, I helped build Apple Pay, and then I helped build Google Pay or Google Wallet or all of the 9 names we spun through, and then Samsung Pay. It was really fun. It was like the same little team. It was the type of work where it's 4 in the morning. You have 3 kids, 2 careers, and you're still so happy to be working. I mean, so happy to be working. And I'd be like freezing in this little like pretend room that was thrown onto the outside of my house, filled with joy. And it's because we had clarity of vision and the same little group. So I'm sure that that's a part of the startup experience that I didn't fully get being with these big brands. But anyways, I then started thinking about where can I successfully make the transition. And for example, at Google, I didn't think I could successfully make the transition because it's a very engineering first culture, in my opinion. And I found that the people with my skill sets got really pigeonholed into biz dev. And I wasn't going to be the person on an airplane getting the deals done. That wasn't I could do that, but it wasn't where I wanted to go. And I was never going to be the one willing to do the 10 extra hours of travel or a dinner or whatever. I wanted to do the work. Um, and then I went to Samsung and it was like such a Korean company. And so I didn't think I could succeed there. So it sort of took these inputs intentionally because I knew I wanted to make the transition. And then it was like, okay, it's going to be Apple or Facebook. And then it was good old networking and interviewing and trying again and some straight old fashioned luck. And it came together.
That is so cool. Two parts of the story like really resonate with me. First of all, having that team that went through Apple Pay to Google Wallet to Samsung Pay and be able to stay together. I actually think there's some research around this. I can't remember who did it. I'll have to dig that up. Teams that stay together are typically more successful. It is like a travesty, in my opinion, of business and just life, I suppose, that for the most part, teams disband, right? Like, but
Well, they just get reorganized in these
right.
big companies, right? Yeah.
But at the same time, it is like being able to do that is such a luxury. And
There's some of the luck, right? I may not be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, but that was a very cool experience.
Absolutely. And then also to your point, like giving yourself the space to be able to try new things.
Which again is a privilege, right?
Privilege, absolutely.
It's a total privilege. My husband had healthcare. So if I ended up without work, I'd already been at McKinsey. So I had some faith I could get hired places.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you were privileged enough to be in that position, it's actually the same thing I did at Meta. At the end, I told my manager or my partner that I was going to leave and got an offer, and then we came up with something else. But it was because my time was available that the opportunity became available.
Well, you set yourself up well, Michelle. How about this is a great time, I think, maybe transition to our next segment.
Crossroads.
Michelle, was there a moment or a decision that helped you to get to where you are today?
Touched on some of these. It felt very brave to leave Wells. And it felt really important. I started talking to a couple of recruiters and they said, 12 years at Wells, you're not going to be able to get out. No one will want you anymore. And that felt really scary and really brave and all of the things. So that decision, and I have a lot of like photographic memories. I'm going on a walk with a friend and different things like that. The decision to choose between this offer I had to leave Meta. And then I ended up taking it Meta, which was to go into the company we had acquired customer. That felt really, really important too. And it was really hard because I think it was, if we pulled 10 people, they would have all said I made the wrong decision. But again, I knew what was important to me. And in retrospect, if I'd left, I would have been laid off for sure. Because that's when it was a fintech role. It was a more senior role. It was higher comp. It was all the things. And instead, I got to have the startup experience and the fintech experience with the safety of Meta. And now I've had that. And now I know what I like about it. And so now I've been able to work with startups and do things from a place of just a lot more information. And I saw all of that, but it felt unabashedly like the wrong decision, according to anyone else looking at the data.
It's interesting. I think, by the way, it's a very relatable experience what that recruiter told you about Wells and being there 12 years and not being able to get out. I think that's in so many people in the back of their mind. I know it's been in the back of my mind before. It's like, can I do anything but work in ads after you've invested so much time into it? But obviously, again, kudos to your focus, right? And your ability to plan, being able to move on and find something.
I mean, I think it's a fallacy. It's a fallacy based in some truth. But again, if you have the privilege of being able to select work and all of these things, you can absolutely get out. I know somebody who left after 21 years and they went to a phenomenal job. I know somebody who left after 17 years. And they're the exception, not the rule. But I don't think it's because other people couldn't. I think other people didn't.
Right. No, I love that. And I agree with you. I think it is a fallacy, but it's nice to hear it from you. Someone who's made that transition.
I mean, part of it's true, right? Like you look at my background and you'll immediately put me fintech payments or commerce. And so I have to really work hard if I want to say work with a company on healthcare. I've got to really explain that story. It's harder.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have worked across a number of different, from government through to consulting, through to, these more traditional financial services and also like tech and fintech. I'm curious about what culturally resonates with you the most, or if there were big differences that you maybe can talk to.
Yeah.
You've just seen so much. And by the way, I will also maybe one caveat. I understand maybe from the original question that it might be different at different points in time. But at the same time, I'd be curious your perspective.
So large companies have a ton of cultures. And so you really can't generalize across the large companies. If you're working in WhatsApp, it's a very, very different culture than if you're working in, groups. They're going to feel very different. The norms of the team are going to be very different. And so I just think you have to sort of recognize that. And there are some bits of the culture that are pervasive to the company, but I even feel like how you experience them can change within a group. So I find culture to be fairly local, 500 people size. It can also depend on the power of a leader's charisma. You and I both knew Carolyn Everson. I think her charisma was so big that
so good.
Hers was probably thousands of people got her charisma, right? And got her culture. But she was super intentional around that. I know other groups where, I felt like even on a team of 100, I was able to really create a culture. You can give me feedback on whether or not that's true. Even though we fit inside a larger culture, I think there were times where we were sort of the first culture people were experiencing within the company. But huge, huge differences. And I think some of that is even industry, right? How do you approach risk? The culture of Wells Fargo pre and post scandal, Meta pre and post scandal, the White House pre and post scandal. I got a theme here. Those changed super fundamentally, right? But you do see that, I think you just kind of have to ask yourself, what is the currency by which decisions are made? The currency by which decisions were made in those three big entities I guess the White House was pretty different than Treasury, was very, very different. Is it about power and relationships? Is it about data? One of the things that surprised me about Meta was how much of it was about writing. I would never have realized long form writing was a major form of influence in your ability to create followers of your long form writing. And, obviously Amazon is famous for some of that. In the smaller companies I've worked in, there's sort of no getting out of the culture. It either works for you or it doesn't. And when I see people who they're fighting against the culture, it feels exhausting to watch. Just leave if you can. If you have the freedom, leave. You didn't ask this, but it's actually interesting. I have had to terminate enough people or coach people to leave, that I do think in many, many of the cases, not all, they're so much happier afterwards because it just wasn't working for them. They were fighting against something that was just really inherent in how the group operated, right or wrong. Um, and and sometimes it is kind of the kindest thing you can do is to help just shorten that process for someone and say, go find a place where you're going to thrive. Again, they've got access to healthcare and a safe place to live, and Maslow's hierarchy is well fed.
No, that makes so much sense. And the idea that obviously big companies are actually a group of cultures is something I think that is often underappreciated. And I will note, you did a great job. I think
Yes.
you had a great. I think you had a great team culture, and there are a lot of people who are better for getting to work as a part of your organization. So, easy answer there. Okay, how about we pause there and we go to our final segment? A message to a future traveler. Michelle, a little twist on our advice question.
Okay.
What is the best piece of advice that you have gotten about your career?
I have some very interesting pieces of advice. So one, when I was at the White House, so you have to remember this is the 90s. There were some interns and some things. This is politics. And a woman who I worked with, who was one of the more senior people who everyone was terrified of, said, you need to start wearing your hair up at work. There are two types of women, and the ones that wear their hair up and the ones that don't. And I was in my 40s before it dawned on me that it was probably okay for me to take my hair down now. That's how long that stuck with me.
Oh my gosh.
And it was good advice because it was hard, right? It was like, sometimes really good advice is like, again, contextually relevant. Unbelievable advice from someone we both know, Ty, from Meta, was to think about the dimensions you wanted in your leadership: subject matter expertise in data warehousing, an ability to communicate compellingly, an ability to hire the best people. Think about who emulates that at a 10 and then actually study that. Talk to the people who work with them, read what they've written, and figure out what they've actually done to build that, because it's knowable. And if what you learn is you're going to max out at a 7, great. Who can you complement yourself with that will get you from a 7 to 10? And that was really, really impactful advice from Ty.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I think that one, Ty is so wise, and I feel like that person, he is a human tome of wisdom. So
and he's willing to share it. He's so intentional about sharing it.
Absolutely. But you are as well. And I just want to say, Michelle, thank you so much for having this conversation.
It was such a delight.
So much fun. And you are brilliant, focused, and I know that so many people can learn so much from you. And you are a 10 on a number of these dimensions. So
as are you.
Thank you. And I will say this: I assume people maybe can follow you on LinkedIn, or if they would like to get in touch? Okay.
Yeah, I'm always happy to help.
Okay, so follow Michelle on the socials. But I really appreciated this, and this is so much fun. Every time you talk to you, I learned something new. Thanks a lot, Michelle.
Working with you has always been my genuine pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, send it to a friend and give us a follow. We're looking forward to making more of the best job I've ever had. Michelle, what was your biggest mistake professionally?
Well, we'd need a longer period of time for me to explain this, but what I will tell you is that it ended with the heads of the KGB and the Secret Service screaming at each other and believing that someone was intentionally trying to undermine the US president and make him look bad in front of the media. And it was all because I made an error. And I had to raise my hand in front of Madeleine Albright and a number of other people and say, no, it was me. And I averted World War III.